And another very impressive jiu-jitsu display is from a man we totally expected it from, as opposed to Matt Wyman, the great Gunnar Nelson, very, very decorated at the highest levels of jiu-jitsu competition, Pan Am medalist, as well as having some very, very impressive performances on the ADCC mat, including wins over, some very, very serious contenders. Jeff Munson, he's beaten David Avalon. He is a very, very serious grappler, making his UFC debut this past Saturday and putting away Demarques Johnson, who came in late as a replacement for Pascal Kraus, who was injured, and Johnson came in a bit heavy, so they had to do a catchweight fight. So on top of the impressive submission win pretty quickly from Gunnar Nelson Saturday, it was done, at a catchweight with a heavier opponent than he, and Nelson coming in at 175 in what was a welterweight fight initially. Very excited about this guy, Javi, and I'm very interested in your opinion and your takeaway from seeing what he did Saturday night and what he showed us. First of all, that stance. It's a karate stance. Of course, Lyoto Machida comes right to mind. The commentators pointed that out. The style is one I'm not too familiar with. I tried to do a bit of research. It's pronounced, I believe, Gogidu, and it's a combination of open hand strikes and defenses and closed fist strikes and defenses. And there's linear and circular movement in there. Just tell me what your impressions are, what you take away from the stance we saw from Gunnar Nelson on Saturday.
Well, I have a translation for that, the name of that martial art. Did you know this?
No. Isn't it hard and soft?
It's actually called pain in the ass. That's what it's called. Karate guys are a pain in the ass to deal with. They are quick and elusive. And what I have figured out, because of their bouncing nature, so you don't see it in the gym every day. Again, it's something that you're not used to dealing with. And I've sparred with some karate guys, and like I said, it takes a round or two to kind of get used to the range and to get used to their unorthodox striking ability. Gunnar Nelson did a great job, and what I have figured out about karate guys, you can't generally reach their head. And I was screaming about this when Lyoto Machida was dominating everybody. You have to kick his legs, and you have to punch your body, because you can't reach their head with punches. Does that make sense? Because their stance is so wide, they're open for inside and outside leg kicks in the front leg, and generally they lean their head back so that it exposes their ribs, their sternum, and that's a really good way to do it. But Gunnar Nelson did such a good job of being in and out, cutting angles. He threw a head kick that landed against Demarques Johnson, and if you really watch Demarques Johnson's footwork, he was kind of just standing. So he's really for Gunnar Nelson to be moving in and out and feel comfortable, because he wasn't really threatening and making him move backwards. So, karate guys, especially real good ones that are real light and nimble and agile, are very difficult to deal with. It takes because you just don't see it every day. You know what I mean? It's not something that's so common where if everybody was doing it, then it wouldn't be that big of a deal. And he did a real good job of being in and out, and eventually he ended up getting to Johnson's legs and taking him down with a double leg.
I was trying to note where the transition was, because I watched the fight first, and I was like, I remembered this part of the fight where Gunnar Nelson was showing this footwork off, showing this unique stance, and being effective and sort of, preventing Demarques Johnson from doing anything offensive on the feet. And then I remember this second independent part of the fight where he's all over Johnson on the floor, taking his back with a body triangle and getting the choke. I didn't remember how it went from one to the other, and I looked back, watched it closely, and it was sort of the same body motion that he threw a punch with that he also shot the double with. It was, it wasn't a drop-down, drive-forward double like you would learn on the collegiate wrestling mats at all. It was sort of the same type of loose-shouldered body movement, this kind of dropping that he did to throw sort of an overhand right that he also did to turn around and push the other way with a double leg. I wonder if this makes any sense, Javi. Is there anything about that type of footwork that actually helps you set up takedowns?
Not for me. I mean, generally, if you're too wide, it kind of takes a little bit of your pop away. Generally in wrestling, when you shoot like a double, you want to hit and drive through the guy. And what Gunnar Nelson did is he kind of drove him back to the fence. And as he drove him down, while he was making contact, he slowly changed his level, eventually got to the legs, and then took him down what we call to the wrong side. I believe he took him down with the side that his head was on. and then eventually got to have guard and started working to pass the guard. But I mean, not really. Not really. It's hard to say, because the fact that when you can throw strikes and you can get the guy's hands up to protect his head when you throw him strikes, it kind of opens up his legs. So he kind of just got to him. And then drove him to the fence. And as he drove him to the fence, it seemed like, from what I can remember, it kind of changed his level.
After the scramble on the floor, he ends up in the side mount on top of Demarques Johnson, and Demarques tries to push out. So he's on the side. He's got Gunnar Nelson and a side mount across him. So he tries to push out and shift the position of his shoulder so that he's facing Gunnar Nelson, maybe to throw him in a guard or something. And maybe this is some of the grappling brilliance that has made Gunnar Nelson such a standout on the mat. But as Demarques is doing this and shifting the position of his body, I almost detected like a fake out from Gunnar Nelson, where he makes it seem like he's going to slide along with Demarques Johnson to keep the side mount, like he's going to try to stay on the side of Demarques Johnson's body and not get put in guard. And then bang, he throws a leg over the top and he's got mount. It was almost like he was trying to sort of respond as if he was trying to keep the side mount and then saw in a split second an opportunity to mount. Or maybe that was even purposeful. Is it a thing to catch the mount that quickly when your opponent thinks you're trying to stay in side control?
Well, sometimes in grappling transitions, I'm pretty sure that he was just kind of trying to control the side mount, and then maybe he felt his balance be slightly disrupted, and then he was able to step over to counter his balance being shifted towards his left, I believe, right? That's generally the way I'll do it, because sometimes you're holding the side mount, the guy's moving, and sometimes you start losing your balance towards the direction the guy on the bottom is taking you, and the easiest thing to do is step over and mount. So, yeah, he high-stepped over to the mount and immediately settled position. So it looked like he was real stable. Once he mounted, he was immediately stable. It didn't look like he had to control Demarques Johnson at all. It looked like the second he stepped over, he looked very heavy and established control immediately.
And if I'm remembering right, I think he went straight to grapevine the legs once he got the mount on Demarques Johnson. How important is that to get your base?
I'm not a super big fan of grapevining the legs like that. We hold our mount slightly different, but maybe he was anticipating that when he mounted that Demarques Johnson was going to be very squirmy, and he was already anchored in.
Well, he did. I mean, he tried to turn around, and then that's what set up ultimately the body triangle. Demarques Johnson did choose to squirm and turn to his stomach, and that's when he locked in the figure four body scissors, the triangle, call it whatever you want. But, I mean, what's the difference, Javi, between having a guy's back with that body triangle versus just having his back with hooks in?
There's several things. Number one, the body triangle has a good side and a bad side, in my opinion. The good side of the body triangle is that it prevents the guy's hips from turning. You can kind of keep your hips square. So think of basically if you're behind somebody and your hips are facing the same direction, and then obviously his chest would be on your back, whatever, and the hips are in line. And the body triangle does a good job of preventing the guy's hips from turning into you. Does that make sense? To where the back is going away from your chest. That's a good thing. The bad thing about the body triangle is that you can't use your legs to kick, heel, or ultimately trap an arm. I've always, the strategy that I follow when I take somebody's back is first establish control, secondly, trap an arm, third, get under a guy's chin, fourth, protect the hand that got under the chin and fits, and finally finish the choke. That's kind of like my protocol when I take a guy's back and finish with a choke. So you can't really do that when you're triangling a guy's body because your legs are too busy, obviously triangling the body. In my opinion, it's much harder to get the choke when you have a body triangle because the guy has both hands to counter, unless you can get the guy belly down, which is what Gunnar Nelson did, because Demarques Johnson started turning, and as he turned, Nelson followed him to the top, so ultimately he had a back-mounted body triangle and had Demarques Johnson flat on his belly. Then it's a huge advantage because you have your hips driving down, and now not only do you have your hips, but you have his hips locked with your legs, plus your hips are driving into his lower back, and it puts a tremendous amount of pressure on your spine. and lower
Yeah,
back.
everybody remembers Tony Fricklin tapping to Ivan Salivary in that very position, and that was a real wake-up call as to how powerful and painful it can be just to have that lock on. And you mentioned, Javi, how not taking the back, just with the hooks in, prevents that option that BJ Penn, of course, is such a master at trapping one of the arms with one of those free legs so that there's only one hand to defend the two-handed rear naked choke and its curtains from there. What we saw Gunnar Nelson do with that body triangle and having Demarques Johnson flat on his stomach, as you mentioned, is still trap one arm, but almost with a half Nelson. I mean, he hooked the back of Demarques Johnson's head and kept that arm isolated that way. Eventually went what looked to be palm to palm on the rear naked choke, and that was it.
Yeah, I kind of noticed that. He put him in it's called a power half. Like, he went like, it was a deep half Nelson, but essentially in wrestling, it's almost like a power half. A power half, generally you have your hands locked, but he was torquing his shoulder so far over that, I would kind of consider that a power half Nelson. And by Gunnar Nelson, how funny is that, right?
Yeah, I know.
Anyway,
Gunnar half Nelson. Let's do it.
But anyways, but he was keeping him flat and then kind of turning him. So he was kind of working against himself because by driving the hips down, it keeps the guy flat, and then he was kind of trying to turn him over. So I'm not exactly sure what he was trying to accomplish there. He was just trying to torture Demarques Johnson, but he was also landing right hands to his head, and that's ultimately what sealed the deal. Johnson was kind of so distracted by the right hand that he was able to shoot the right hand in, go palm to palm. He fell to what we call the weak side, meaning that the arm that was choking was facing the roof of the arena, and ultimately finished the choke that way.
And that was that. What should we look for as far as, I don't know how familiar you are with Gunnar Nelson's grappling credentials. I mean, this is a very special kid with a lot of special talent, and he's taken sabbaticals from MMA. He's been around for years, but he's just stopped doing MMA for months, years at a time to pursue just strict fundamentals in jiu-jitsu. Of course, a black belt under Renzo Gracie. What is it that's special about Gunnar Nelson's grappling game that we can look forward to going forward in the UFC?
What I picked up, and I've heard the name, but I never really saw him fight before, he's just got very good control. He's very poised. He doesn't rush anything. He's in no rush to finish. He waits for the opportunity. He sets things up beautifully with strikes, has tremendous control. He just looks like his fundamentals are very, very sound. And, somebody I really look forward to watching again because his fundamentals just look tremendous. Even when he tapped him out, it was just like another day at the office. Didn't get overly excited. Almost like he expected himself to do it, and he just looked very, very tremendous. He just looked tremendous, and I could really appreciate a guy like that that has very, very good, solid fundamentals. And I mean, man, he trains with Renzo Gracie and the guys over in New York, from what I understand. John Danaher as well. I mean, just he has all the tools at his disposal, and in my opinion, I think he's just going to keep getting better.
Very excited to watch Gunnar Nelson develop. They really have a special piece of talent on their hands in him, and he came through with flying colors, and as you mentioned, looking cool as a cucumber doing it. I mean, he showed the kind of post-fight reaction that you see from a guy who's almost trying to say, look, I have to do this to really show you what I can do. Like, I knew I was going to do that. I knew I was going to win that fight, so I'm not going to act like I just, won the Super Bowl or that I somehow did something I didn't expect to do. I'm not going to have that showing of emotion, and maybe he will somewhere down the line when he feels he rose to the occasion, but nothing but confidence exuded from the very talented Gunnar Nelson, and a lot to learn about his stance on the feet as well as his performance on the ground. Before we let you get out of here, Javi, on